Welcome to my channel, Veterans Legacy. Today's story will take you deep into the heart of justice, honor, and truth. It's not just a story, it's a journey through the pain of a veteran whose bravery was questioned by the very system he swore to defend. So sit back, open your heart, and remember, heroes walk among us, often unrecognized. The courtroom was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. The air was thick with tension, as if the room itself knew that what was about to unfold would not be easily forgotten. At the center stood Sergeant David Cole, a 68-year-old war veteran. His posture was straight despite the years that had bent many of his peers. His chest bore a modest row of medals, each one a story of sacrifice, courage, and loss. But that morning, those very medals, the symbols of his honor, were being called fake. David stood at the defendant's table, his hands clasped behind his back, wearing the same quiet dignity that had carried him through years of service. Across from him, the judge adjusted his glasses, looking at David with a faint smirk. "Mr. Cole," Judge Richardson said, his tone dripping with disbelief, "you're telling this court that you served in Delta Force. That you fought in classified missions. That you earned the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and several others." "Yes, sir," David replied calmly. The judge chuckled, a sharp, dismissive laugh that echoed through the courtroom. "Mr. Cole, I've seen my share of liars. These medals, they're not even in proper order. Anyone could have bought them online." A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom audience, mostly younger attorneys and a few journalists who were eager for a story. David didn't flinch. He stood like a statue carved from stone, his eyes steady. "I understand your doubt, sir," David said softly. "But I don't wear them to impress anyone. I wear them for those who can't anymore." The judge leaned forward, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "As that's so, maybe you can tell us about one of these top-secret missions of yours." "I can't, sir. They were classified." "Oh, of course," the judge sneered. "How convenient." David's public defender shifted nervously in her seat. She was young, fresh out of law school, and this case, a minor dispute over a veteran's benefits, had somehow spiraled into this humiliating circus. All David wanted was justice. His military records had been lost in a fire decades ago, and the bureaucracy refused to recognize his service. Without proof, his pension and medical benefits had been denied. So here he was, an old soldier fighting one last battle, not on a battlefield but in a courtroom. The prosecutor, a sharp-tongued man in a tailored suit, stood and began pacing. "Your Honor, this man's story has more holes than Swiss cheese. There's no record of a David Cole in Delta Force. His name doesn't appear in any official lists. I believe he's fabricated his past for sympathy and financial gain." David looked down. He remembered the night he pulled a wounded comrade out of enemy fire, the smell of smoke and blood in the air. He remembered the cries for help that still echoed in his dreams. And now, those memories, his truth, were being called lies. He closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind, he saw the faces of the men he'd lost. "Hold the line, Sergeant. Never back down." The judge leaned back in his chair. "I'll be honest, Mr. Cole, I've seen scammers try to play the veteran card before. I don't buy it." Then, with an arrogant grin, he said something that would later haunt him. "Maybe next time you should buy medals that look more real." A gasp filled the room. The young attorney tried to object, but the judge silenced her with a glare. David simply nodded. "Yes, sir." He turned slightly, revealing a faded tattoo on his arm, a winged dagger with the words, "De Oppresso Liber." The courtroom murmured. That insignia belonged to the U.S. Army Special Forces, but the judge dismissed it again. Anyone can get a tattoo. Just then, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The sound was subtle, a soft creak of wood, but everyone turned to look. An older man walked in, wearing a perfectly pressed military uniform. His presence was magnetic, commanding. Silver hair, sharp eyes, and ribbons that spoke of decades of service. The bailiff stood immediately. "General on deck." The entire room froze. Even the judge, who moments ago had been so confident, looked startled. The man walked slowly to the front, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. He stopped beside David and saluted him. "Sergeant Cole," he said, his voice firm but full of respect. David returned the salute, his hand trembling slightly. "General Morrison, sir." The judge stammered. Excuse me, General, what is the meaning of this interruption?" The general turned, fixing him with a cold stare. "Meaning? The meaning, Judge, is that you've been mocking one of the bravest men I've ever served with." The courtroom went dead silent. "This man," the general continued, "was part of Operation Iron Dagger in 1983. A mission so classified that even now, most of the files remain sealed. I was his commanding officer." The prosecutor's mouth fell open. The judge blinked rapidly, suddenly realizing how far he'd gone. "I watched Sergeant Cole drag 3 of his men out of a burning vehicle under enemy fire," Morrison said. "He took shrapnel to the leg and refused evacuation until every man was accounted for. Those medals on his chest." The general's voice hardened. "He earned every single one." A murmur of shock spread across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. The judge swallowed hard. "General, I wasn't aware." "No, you weren't," the general interrupted. "Because you never cared to ask. You saw an old man with medals and thought he was a fraud. You mocked him. You mocked his brothers. You mocked every soldier who's ever come home to find the world has forgotten them." The general's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through his iron tone. David stood still, eyes glistening. He hadn't seen the general in decades. The judge looked like a man who had been stripped of his robe and pride. I apologize, Sergeant Cole." David nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, Your Honor. But please, don't apologize to me. Apologize to all the ones who never made it back." The general placed a hand on David's shoulder. "You did good, soldier." A tear rolled down David's cheek, the first visible sign of emotion all day. "Thank you, sir." The general turned to the judge. "This man deserves not just his benefits, he deserves our gratitude. The fact that he had to come here and prove his worth is a disgrace." The courtroom, once filled with laughter and doubt, now stood in reverent silence. Even the young public defender wiped her eyes. After the hearing, the judge ordered the immediate restoration of David's benefits, along with a formal apology from the court. But that wasn't what mattered most to David. As he walked out of the courtroom with the general by his side, he felt something deeper than vindication. He felt seen. The general smiled at him. "Still keeping that tattoo, huh?" David chuckled. "Never thought I'd have to use it as evidence." They both laughed softly, though their laughter carried the weight of years gone by. That evening, David visited the local memorial park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He walked slowly to a stone wall engraved with names, the names of his fallen brothers. He traced his fingers along the letters. "They thought I was lying," he whispered. "But I told them about you. I told them we were real." He placed his hand over his heart, feeling the metals brush against his chest. Each one was cold, heavy, a reminder of sacrifice. A young boy nearby, maybe 10 years old, approached him shyly. "Sir, are you a real soldier?" David smiled. "I was. A long time ago." The boy looked at his medals with wide eyes. "My grandpa was a soldier too." David knelt down, his knees creaking. "Then you tell your grandpa thank you for me, okay?" The boy nodded eagerly and ran off to his mother. David looked back at the sunset, the colors fading into night. And for the first time in years, he felt peace. Weeks later, a news story aired about what had happened in that courtroom. The headline read, "Judge mocks veteran, General interrupts hearing to defend hero." The footage went viral. Across the nation, veterans reached out, sharing their own stories of being doubted, dismissed, and forgotten. Messages poured in from strangers thanking David for standing tall. But David never sought fame. He lived quietly in his small home, tending to his garden, visiting the memorial every Sunday. One morning, he received a letter. The return address was from the Department of Defense. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten. "Your service was never forgotten. Welcome home, Sergeant." He held the letter to his chest and whispered, "Took you long enough." A few months later, General Morrison passed away. David attended the funeral, standing at attention as the rifle volleys echoed in the distance. When the folded flag was handed to the general's widow, David saluted sharply, tears streaming down his face. He knew that the world would move on. It always did, but he also knew that the bond between soldiers never truly faded. That night, David sat on his porch, looking at the stars. He remembered the faces of the men who had stood beside him, the nights they shared stories under a foreign sky. "Guess we're all heading home one by one," he whispered. Then he smiled softly. "But at least now, they'll know we were real." The wind rustled through the trees, gentle, almost like a whisper from the past. He closed his eyes, letting the night wrap around him. And so ends the story of Sergeant David Cole, a man whose honor was questioned, but whose truth stood unshaken. A man who taught us that courage doesn't end when the war is over, and respect is not given by rank, but by heart. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone you know, someone who served, someone who still carries the weight of unseen battles, then like, comment, and subscribe to Veterans Legacy. Because here, we remember the forgotten, we honor the brave, and we tell their stories, so they will never fade.